Welcome to WanaxTV Live. Today we talk about the Minoans and ancient Egypt in Bronze Age. Before we begin, I'd like to thank to everybody who's joining us live right now. I have rescheduled this a couple of times. I was working hard on all of the exhibits that I'm going to show. I had a very limited time frame to get this ready. It's actually a much bigger topic than I anticipated, but it's going to be a great episode. I'd like to thank to everybody who is a channel subscriber, all of the channel Patreons, and all of the YouTube members. Also, during the last stream, which was yesterday about the Mycenaeans and ancient Egypt, we had a contribution from Hekaton. So thanks to him. And of course, I promised Lino Benetti, I'm not going to forget him this time. So big thanks to you guys. And with that being said, let's get to the segments of this episode. So first, we're going to talk about the background on both civilizations a little bit, both ancient Egypt and the Minoan civilization. Then commerce and diplomacy will break down of how the relationship between the two civilizations worked. We have the early trade contacts, which are going to be the earliest records, archaeological records at first, and then more concrete evidence of these two civilizations trading in the early part and throughout the third millennium BC. Afterwards, we will move on and we'll talk about the presence of the Minoan artifacts in Egypt. Likewise, we'll talk about the presence of the Egyptian artifacts on Crete. Then, segment number 6, Egyptian inscriptions. This is where we talk about Keftiu, Egyptian name for Crete, being mentioned in the Egyptian hieroglyphic sources, text, excuse me. We'll talk and we'll bring this depictions of the Minoans by the Egyptians as they appeared on the Egyptian frescoes. We have, I believe, 4 or 5 exhibits for that, and we'll conclude with the fall of the Minoan civilization and the relevant time period when it comes to contemporary Egypt. We have Interdictor, he's in the chat. He says, I thought I was going to miss this as it was originally 3 a.m. for me. Being late worked out well. Well, I'm glad it worked out that way. The original plan was 4 p.m. today Eastern time. Right now it's 5:55 p.m. So I missed the time frame by about 2 hours, but I had something scheduled in the morning, and then from noon or from 12 or 1 p.m. I was working on setting up all the paintings that I'm going to show for this video. Obviously, I did the background animations as well, and these segments and all the other stuff that's going to be included in the video. So it ended up being bigger than I anticipated. So I kept moving for half an hour, for 15 minutes, for 20 minutes, and finally we're here. Nicolaus says, "No apologies, it's Greek time." Okay, yeah, yeah. And shout out to Zadeo in the chat. He's from Crete, so this is very interesting topic for him as well. And let's see, let's see. I am pretty sure we had considerable chat activity while everybody was waiting for this episode to start. We have Rithimna. He's back. Thank you for being here, my friend. Lino Benetti. Obviously, shout out to Lino as well. Real Uvain. He says, I suspect the Egypto-Minoans had connections to the first Babylonian culture too. We have On Bed says Time keeps on slipping into the future. All right. Did we miss any? We have Fletcher. Cheers, everybody. We have Alessandra Comini also. We have Estate Care is in the chat. Let's go, Estate Care. And please forgive me if somebody has a long username. I will try if I am not confident on pronouncing it correctly live. If it's a long username, I'll try to shorten it up. So hopefully that's fine. Hackathon is in the chat. So Hackathon, you almost missed. I gave you a shout out for the contribution in the last live. So that's to you and Lino Benetti for right here. Displayed both on the screen for a second. And with that being said, I think hopefully everybody's ready. I think we're ready to go. It's going to be a deep dive into Minoan Egyptian relations. It's mostly trade, a little bit of diplomacy. And unfortunately, we don't have Minoan records to testify that because Linear B as well as the Cretan hieroglyphs are undeciphered. So we'll focus on the Egyptian sources, which are not very hostile to the Minoans. I suppose they were not a warlike civilization. They were not enemies to the Egyptians. So their depictions and mentions of the Minoans by the Egyptians are quite neutral, I would say. All right, with that being said, we will dive into background on both civilizations. As you can see, we have the ancient Egyptian civilization developing in the late 4th millennium BC. Unification of Egypt is dated to about 3100, maybe 3150-ish BC. And following that, we have early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom period. During it's very early on actually that during these early periods, during this first phase that we pointed out of the three that we are showing on the screen when it comes to the Egyptians, that we have the great Egyptian pyramids, the pyramid of Cheops, as it is as he's known to the Greeks, or Khufu in the native Egyptian language. So the pyramids have already been built by the time we have those extensive Egyptian Minoan relations. We have the Old Kingdom period ends in about 2181 BC, and then we have the first intermediate period when there's a lot of internal struggle around a lot of battles between different factions, and eventually the Middle Kingdom emerges in the at around 2134 BC and lasts until 1690, which is the most relevant period for us, together with the beginning of the New Kingdom period, which starts at 1549 BC. When it comes to the Minoan civilization, as we know, it developed gradually all the way from the Neolithic times. The first settlements, the very first settlement, according to the archaeological finds that we have, is none other than Knossos, which is dated to the Neolithic period, I believe late 8th millennium BC, and from there, Knossos gradually over thousands of years developed into a great palatial center that we know of during the Bronze Age, but nevertheless the Minoan civilization period is considered to have begun at around 3100 BC, the pre-palatial period of the Cretans, where we have basically Bronze Age arriving to the island of Crete, urbanization on the island, and so on. during the late part of the third millennium BC. We have development of the first writing system when it comes to the Minoans, which is Cretan hieroglyphs. Linear A would be developed as well during the early part of the following millennium, of the second millennium BC. We have the Old Palatial period, roughly 2000 BC, 1950, maybe 1925, depending on on the source, that the Old Palatial period on the island of Crete begins, and this is the glory time of the Minoan civilization. This is where all the great palatial centers had been built. Unfortunately, in the 18th century BC, there was an apparent earthquake which destroyed many of the palatial centers, many of the palaces, actually, not the population centers themselves. The Minoans were able to bounce immediately. They did not lose much when it comes to international relations. They rebuilt virtually all of the palace centers, and they built them back. They rebuilt them to a way grander scale than ever before, and that's where we have the new palatial period that starts from 1750 BC and lasts all the way to the mid 15th century, when the Minoan civilization is conquered by the Mycenaeans. So this is a little background on each civilization. Hackathon says, you can call me Jason the second, and I saw it. Thank you so much for the shout out. Well, sounds good. Sounds good. I'll call you Jason. Do you mean Jason the second or just Jason? I guess just Jason would be easier. Rodrigo says, good evening. Wanax, good evening to you. Was the new kingdom a result of Thera eruption? You mean the new palace period on Crete? It was not. So the new palatial period starts at 1750, not because there was a Thera eruption that happens, I believe, at 1600 BC later on. This was due to a sudden destruction, which scholars attribute to a natural catastrophe, very likely an earthquake, because it hit the palatial centers simultaneously. There was a lot of destruction and immediate buildup of all of the palace centers simultaneously, especially at Knossos. Knossos was immediately rebuilt to a way bigger palace. The ruins of the palace that you see on the screen right now date to the new palace period. So it was rebuilt, and the Minoans did not suffer any consequences. There was no attack from the outside. They did not lose any of their colonies. They did not lose Miletus. They did not lose colonies in the Cyclades, and they only expanded their influence from then on. So 1750, right after that supposed natural catastrophe, supposed earthquake, we have the peak of the Minoan civilization, and the Thera eruption would happen about 150 years later, at around 1600 BC, and that's where we have the emergence of the Mycenaeans, and then in the following century or so, Mycenaeans are able to snatch the Aegean islands away from the Cretans, and eventually 15th century, the Mycenaean takeover of Crete happens. Lino Benanti says, new refined dating for the eruption is 1580. Well, that makes sense. I would expect the eruption to the dating to go closer to the mid, or towards the mid 16th century. So I believe 1600 BC was a very approximate date. If they moved it to 1580, well, is it due to radiocarbon dating, Lino? Do you know? Jason says there's a dating controversy of the carbon dating being up to a century earlier from Egyptological dates. Yes, that's correct. I believe originally they put it at about 1500, but that was based on archaeology or what they believe, how they interpreted archaeological evidence at the time. But when they did radiocarbon dating, it was 1600 BC. And whether if it's 1600 or 1580, that's all very similar. All right, so we already have deep discussions about Thera and its impact on Minoans and the Egyptians. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Let's first, if we go at this pace, we'll finish at maybe midnight my time. So let's switch to the second. This was introductory segment, the background on each civilization, and now we have commerce and diplomacy. So this is approximately how the relationship between the two powers, or let's say civilizations, worked. In the Egyptian sources, we have a name for Crete, and it's Keftiu. It It signifies both the island of Crete, the land of the Heftiu, being located in the midst of the Great Green, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, and we have the people of the Heftiu, which means we have the Keftiu people, which means just the Cretans. That's how they were known to the Egyptians, just the Cretans. The same name Cretans as they were known to themselves, but they probably didn't call themselves the Keftiu. They very likely had a term which is closer to a Greek term for Crete, which is Kreta or Crete or something similar. And when it comes to the linear A scripts and Cretan hieroglyphs, unfortunately, those are undeciphered, and we do not know how the Minoans viewed the, the ancient Egyptian kingdom. We do not know their own terminology for relevant things on Crete and Egypt, and we mostly rely on the external evidence here, chiefly Egyptians in this context. Zadeo says the Minoans had a religion which had lots of goddesses, but matriarchy cannot be assumed. I agree. I don't think there's any evidence for matriarchy on ancient Crete beyond women having an important religious role and slightly serving as priestesses. But beyond that, especially judging by the Egyptian sources, which often depict and talk about the Minoan chieftains, the chieftains of the Keftiu, there were no women among the Cretan rulers. Is it an Egyptian word to describe them? So the Egyptian word is Keftiu, or the Egyptian language as it was written unfortunately does not have vowels, so the exact writing is, I believe, I will find that for you in a second and put it on the screen. That's fair enough. In the biblical sources in ancient Hebrew, it was known as Kaftor, and likewise there were similar terms in other Near Eastern languages and So it's very certain that the ancient Minoans called themselves just the Cretans. They used their own word for Cretans, which is likely similar to Coptic, Crete, something like that. Unfortunately, we do not know that due to the Linear A records being undeciphered. Somebody in the chat, I believe, mentioned the exact symbols for Crete in the Egyptian hieroglyphs after transliteration, obviously. So let me take a look at that. Well, we'll display that on the screen at some point during the episode. I can't find it right now, but it was it is presumed it was written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and presumably it was pronounced Keftiu by the Egyptians. So let's keep it at that for now, and I will find exact signs for it during the episode. As you can see, so much of their relations was based on trade, and even diplomacy was based on trade and commerce. Crete was viewed as a wealthy island, as a faraway island, but as a wealthy island nonetheless, a trading hub. And Cretans themselves appear very richly dressed in the Egyptian frescoes. They wear a lot of jewelry, very decorated clothes, and they were very highly valued as artisans in ancient Egypt. We have Cretan exports of luxury goods to Egypt. There are reports of some metals and timber as well, but chiefly luxury goods. They were considered to be a luxurious society, and the Egyptian exports to Crete consisted of both raw materials and some luxury items as well. But Crete mainly imported raw materials and produced luxury goods out of it and then exported it back to Egypt and Near East. The same thing as the Mycenaeans would do after that. So the commercial contacts, they start in the early third millennium BC, as we already mentioned, and the commercial peak is between 2000 and 1450 BC, which is approximately between the start, which is when the old palatial period on Crete approximately starts, roughly corresponding to the beginning of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt, and the commercial relations obviously end with the fall of the Minoan civilization in around 1450 BC, perhaps a little later. It is unknown if the Mycenaeans just conquered the island straight up conquered the island at that time, or there was a lingering Minoan independence or fragmentation somewhere before the island was finally taken over, so we do not know the details of the Mycenaean takeover. And as you can see, these periods which we have mentioned, they correspond to the periods of Middle Kingdom, Second Intermediate Period, which is the Hyksos time, and early New Kingdom period in Egypt, and they correspond to Old Palatial and New Palatial time periods in Crete. And I would add a later part of the pre-palatial period as well. So right here we have the early trade contacts between the two civilizations, and the earliest piece of evidence that we have is obsidian vase fragment, which is found in Knossos, and it is dated to the early Minoan 2A period, which is a time in the first half of the third millennium BC, between 27 and 2500 BC, and it corresponds to the roughly to the early dynastic period in Egypt. When it comes to the obsidian, obsidian was considered to be a luxury material at the time. It's a volcanic glass, very sharp. It could be it could be worked very finely. Could create a jewelry out of obsidian, weapons out of obsidian in the Neolithic times, and during the late Neolithic period, and even possibly during the early Bronze Age, there were still obsidian weapons in some corners of the known world, as we would call it. So obsidian was highly valued, and we have a piece. That fragment is actually a piece of a obsidian vase, or a pottery, obsidian pottery, was which happened to be located in the city of Knossos. It is believed that at this time it was still too early on for Egypt and Minoans to trade directly with one another, so it is presumed that this piece of material would end up being in Crete indirectly through trade, perhaps through Levant, Cyprus, and so on. We have alabaster vessels and ostrich eggs dated to about 2000 BC. They're important from Egypt. So now we're already talking about the early peak period of their relations. We're not talking about indirect trade anymore. We're talking about direct trade between the Minoan civilization and the Egyptians. So between this early Minoan 2 period, 27 to 2500 BC, we had indirect trade at that point. And then as the Minoans were getting wealthier and wealthier, and they started to expand their own commercial network themselves, they came to direct contact with the Egyptians, and then we have more direct trade between the two civilizations. And by 2000 BC, we already have some vessels being imported to Crete, and we possibly have Minoan, Cretan timber, and possibly some oil being traded or exported to Egypt. All right, we have some shoes from Crete in the chat, which presumably a leader of the city of Mari, Zimri-Lim, received. Interesting. Zadeo says the Greeks said that King Minos ruled Crete. Obviously, this is Greek mythology. We're not going to be talking about that too much in the episode, but perhaps in one of the next episode, if you would like to put a Cretan Greek mythology as a topic, we could do that. I mean, we voted on this last night, so perhaps after this episode, you can give out a few options, a few ideas in the chat for the next episode, and I'll put a poll, and then everybody can vote on it. What do you think? Jason says, I'm fairly convinced that there was no king among the Minoans. Well, that's interesting topic. We definitely do know that the Minoans had palatial centers, several of them: Knossos, Phaistos, Malia, Gurnia, Zakros to the east, Kydonia to the west, some other minor centers as well. So whether or not they had similar organization like the Mycenaeans in mainland Greece, it's possible, but there's just no evidence. It's just speculation at this point. It could be a case of Knossos being the most powerful and holding a hegemonic position over the island, and thus the ruler of Knossos would be the most powerful king or ruler on Crete and somehow hold hegemony over the whole island. Could be a case of several independent or more or less independent palatial centers, or it could be a case of this changing throughout the time periods. So it could be one thing in 2000 BC, could be another in 1500. So we are not sure because there's no evidence, there's no written records, and it's difficult for us to say. Biggest center of obsidian trade was Milos. Yes, the island of Milos was a center of obsidian trade dating back to the Neolithic times, and the same goes for Crete and the central and the Greek mainland. I believe that the obsidian that we're talking about here is is originating in Nubia and or Ethiopia. So the obsidian fragment that we're talking about here that's found on the on in Knossos, which is considered a piece of Egyptian obsidian pottery. The obsidian used to produce that is from Nubia or Ethiopia. So this would be a first instance of indirect trade between the two civilizations. Jason says the palaces are famously misnamed, though. They are more like temples fused with cities with central planning in the construction. The quote unquote palaces held public rituals and common masses. You might be right here because when we say palace center, this is approximately what we mean. We don't mean just a random palace. When we say palace center in the context of Mycenaean Greece and Minoan Crete, we think of a political entity with a high religious function as well as economic function that redistributes and controls the economy of the land that surrounds it. Basically, the palatial economy as it relates to the Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, this is what it is. The palace or the ruling class that runs the palace center collects all relevant materials, all weapons, goods, controls the storage of the goods, controls the redistribution of the goods and weapons and everything else. So that's basically how it worked back then in Crete and in Mycenae, in the Mycenaean Greece. Josh Gardner says City Hall, but grand. Yes, most of the obsidian came from the Cyclades and specifically the island of Milos or Melos was the number one obsidian center dating back to the Neolithic times. So everybody came to the island to mine obsidian. But that's not where this obsidian vase fragment comes from. It comes from a quarry believed to be located in Nubia or Ethiopia, that's to the south of Egypt, which is what the Egyptians used to produce these the pieces of pottery and one of those eventually ended up in Crete. With that being said, we're moving on, and we will go to the Minoan presence, the presence of the Minoan artifacts in Egypt. First, we have Kamares ware pottery, which in Egypt is present between 19 and 1700 BC. When it comes to the pottery in general, this is the Minoan pottery of the time period, and I believe that the Minoans produced it from 2100 all the way to 1450 BC. So this Minoan pottery, and I'll show it to you on the screen right now. This is the Minoan pottery. So this is the pottery we're talking about, the Kamaris ware, Minoan pottery produced on Crete from 2100 to 1415 BC to 1450, excuse me, BC. This is how the pottery looked, and many of you are probably familiar with this pottery, very, very famed Cretan pottery of the Old and New Palatial periods. All right. And that's light on dark decoration, as you can see, with white, red, and orange colors. Let me put it in a corner so you can look at it while we're talking about it. Let's resize it a little bit, perhaps put it here. All right, there we go. So this is the pottery we're talking about, and this pottery is found in Egypt between 19 and 1700 BC. It's found chiefly in places such as Abydos and Lahoun, and it's copied by the Egyptians and then produced by the Egyptians locally, which just testifies to the level of prestige the Minoan artifacts held not only in Egypt but throughout the Near East, in Levant also, in Cyprus unquestionably, and in Greece, in mainland Greece as well. As you can see, light on dark decoration with white, red, and orange colors, and usually abstract motifs with dark or black backgrounds. I believe in some of the vases we can see fish as well, so not always abstract. Perhaps in the later period they started doing animal motifs also, but this is the Kamares where the Minoan pottery between 21 and 2100 and 1450 BC. Besides the pottery, we have Minoan seals and Minoan jewelry present in Egypt, starting from actually dated to about 1500 BC, and it's found in 18th dynasty burials among the Egyptian nobility, aristocracy, pharaohs, and Minoan gold items and seals and other objects are found. So clearly the Minoan jewelry was very well regarded throughout the ancient world. As we have mentioned, Minoans were considered to be a civilization, a society of luxury, of wealth, and they were in fact very wealthy compared to many of their contemporary civilizations of the time. It's important to mention that not being constantly in war helped them acquire that wealth and not spend it on war. They spend it on luxury, architecture, architectural achievements, and other things that made Minoan respect grow among their contemporaries. Also, Minoan fresco at Tel el Daba, believed originally to I believe originally it was dated to the Hyksos period, but then there was another minor dating controversy there. So it was originally dated to the Hyksos period, the second intermediate period, the late part of the second intermediate period in Egypt, and then now it is mostly dated to a period of Tutmosis III and his mother Hatshepsut. And I will show that on the screen as well, so you can see which fresco we're talking about, the very famous fresco. And this is the fresco or frescoes that we're talking about. And Conthea says they have not war in land because they were the first thalassocracy. Yes, that's correct. They did not have any major land wars, perhaps naval battles here and there. They were known to have a very strong navy by the Greeks, by the classical Greeks, should I say, and the ancient Greeks. We have a fragment of Bull Leaper, and here are the frescoes for Tel el Daba, likely dated to the reign of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. We do know that during the early reign of Thutmose III, at first Hatshepsut was the pharaoh. She was in charge, and then she ruled together with her son Thutmose III. And then when she passed away, Thutmose continued his reign as a sole pharaoh. And even during the end, towards the end of his reign, he started deleting his mother from the royal descriptions, frescoes, pictures. Uh, the reason for that is not known, presumably because she was a woman, or perhaps of some other unpopularity that she had among some relevant factors in Egypt. We are not sure. Originally, like I said, it was dated to the late Hyksos period, so several centuries earlier than this. And this is the fresco. As you can see on the fresco, this was either commissioned by the Egyptians and then brought by the Minoans to Egypt, or what is more likely is that the Minoan artisans were hired and they came to Egypt and they created this beautiful fresco. As you can see it here. So a lot of bull leaping, as you can see here, a typical Minoan festivity or a sport or a ritual, whatever uh, exact use or whatever exactly bull leaping meant to the Minoans. We are not sure whether if it was played as a sport or it was some kind of a ritual, perhaps a sport that's also a part of a ritual, or that's chiefly played or featured on rituals or on festivities, carnival festivals, perhaps religious festivals. Very likely that was the case, but either way, this is the fresco we're talking about. And now we're moving on from the Minoan presence on Egypt, excuse me, to the Egyptian presence on Crete. So besides what we already mentioned of the pottery and Egyptian artifacts found on Crete, from year 2000 BC onwards, we have much more trade between the two civilizations. We have statuette of goldsmith user dated to about 2000 to 1700 BC. It's an Egyptian figure or a figurine that's found at Knossos. And we have possible presence of Egyptian craftsmen on the island of Crete. We have the famed scarab of Thutmose III, dated to 15th century BC. His reign covered much of the century. I believe he started his reign in the earlier part of the century, and then that lasted throughout much of the century, the mid-century, and eventually ended late in the 15th century BC. This scarab is discovered in a Cretan burial site, and it was a part of over 100 gold and other items. It just shows Egyptian the, the, the prestige of the Egyptians themselves that they held on Crete, not only Cretan prestige in Egypt that we talked about, that we just talked about. It indicates royal gift exchange. So a lot of Egyptian artifacts are found in Minoan burials on Crete, and likewise great number of Minoan artifacts found in the Egyptian royal tombs and burials throughout Egypt. We have scarabs, faience figures, storage drawers, continuously appearing on Crete between 16th and 13th centuries BC. So this continued into the Mycenaean period as well, as we can see, and commonly found at Knossos and other sites across the island. Jason says, I think a scarab of Kion from the 15th dynasty was found at a Minoan context. So there were trade relations during the second intermediate period too. It must have continued during the reign of Ahmose. I'm assuming you mean Ahmose the first, who ended the Hyksos period. So yes, we have already mentioned this. So already in the late third millennium BC, we have direct trade between Egypt and Crete, and this would have covered the Hyksos period, obviously. This would have covered the intermediate period, and this would have covered the New Kingdom period as well, but also the Middle Kingdom period before that. Let's quickly get back to the previous segment where I displayed that just so that so as you can see here, commerce and diplomacy, we know that it started in the first part of the third millennium BC indirectly, the trade did, and then slowly but surely increased and became more direct as the Minoans were able to get wealthier and wealthier and spread out their own commercial network. Eventually, they came into direct contact with the Egyptians, excuse me. And already in the Middle Kingdom, we have that contact, and throughout the second intermediate period, we have it, and the early part of the New Kingdom era in Egypt. And this would have covered Old Palatial and New Palatial. It would have covered the later part of the pre-Palatial period, to be more precise, and then the Old Palatial, and then the New Palatial period on Crete. Jason says, yes, they are not direct successors I'm not sure what you're talking about. Probably the Egyptians of the New Kingdom and the Hyksos. Are you talking about that? But there was trade in Avaris during the Hyksos period that continued during the New Kingdom. So yes, the Minoan trade continued throughout the Hyksos period and then into the New Kingdom. That's correct. All right, so we have gone through the Egyptian presence of the Egyptian artifacts on Crete. That's nice. And now we move on to the Egyptian inscriptions which name the island of Crete and the Cretans. And here we have the earliest, as we have already mentioned, the name that Egyptians used for Crete and Cretans was Keftiu. The earliest mention appears to be in the 15th century BC, the earlier part of the century, I believe. In the annals of Thutmose III, he mentions Keftiu sending tribute or gifts, either one, likely gifts. Crete was not recorded to be a vassal or anything like that to Egypt at any point in history. So very likely they were just paying respect to a great pharaoh, being a land from far away when it comes to the Egyptians. And that first instance of greeting gifts or gifts included raw materials such as metals and possibly timber. And we have a hymn of victory also dated to Thutmose III, attributed to his reign at around 1450 BC, another reference to the Keftiu, and he mentions the Keftiu among the foreign lands, recognizing the Egyptian greatness, Egyptian power, and another set of gifts was sent by the Minoans to the Egyptian pharaoh, and that consists of silver, lapis lazuli, and other goods. And this happened during the military campaigns of Thutmose III in the Levant. So Thutmose, when it comes to him, we mentioned that yesterday during the Mycenaean Egyptian relations video, but let's just remind ourselves, Thutmose III was one of the great military pharaohs of the new kingdom of Egypt. He's famed to have defeated the Kushites in Nubia. He had many campaigns over there, and he had many campaigns throughout the Levant, chiefly against the rebels in the area and the pro-Mitanni states and cities in the Levant. He was the second pharaoh to cross the Euphrates River, as he was directly attacking and raiding the Mitanni territory, the first pharaoh being the Thutmose I. And during each one of these military campaigns where he was successful, he defeated new enemies, new adversaries, those adversaries being cities and little kingdoms which were allied to the Mitanni. He would receive tribute from the surrounding kingdoms, and I believe that even there was a record of tribute or gifts coming from the Hittites as well during one or more instances. Some of those were recorded to have come from Cyprus, possibly, not to mention the Levantine city-states, obviously, and several instances, as you can see, coming all the way from Crete. So Thutmose III was definitely very well respected and feared throughout the ancient known world during his reign. We have a statue base of Amenhotep III in the Egyptian Thebes, located to 14th century BC. And this is the first time where we have the confirmation of the geographic locations of the Keftiu, not only Keftiu but also Tanayu, which is the mainland Greece according to the Egyptians. But we have toponyms, we have geographical context here, and in this statue base of Amenhotep III, we have Keftiu and then significant locations mentioned within the land of the Keftiu, which are Knossos, Phaistos, Amnisos, and Kydonia. Amnisos was not a great palatial center on itself, but it was a port of Knossos. So just like Nauplia is mentioned in the land of the Tanaiu, despite not being a great palatial center on the Greek mainland itself, it is still mentioned because it was relevant to the Egyptians who came there, Egyptian merchants, because they first arrived to the port and then they went to the capital city. So Phaistos was a significant location in the southern part of Crete. Kydonia was significant in the western part of Crete, and Knossos was by far the most significant settlement in the northern and the eastern part of Crete. That was probably the area which was controlled by Knossos. Obviously, we do have other palatial centers to the east, excuse me, such as Zakros to the far east, and then Malia and Gurnia between Zakros and central Crete. So as we can see, we have locations recorded by the Egyptians, and because of this, we definitely do know that Keftiu is in fact Crete, and the people of the Keftiu are in fact the Minoan Cretans. Let's not forget, Keftiu is also mentioned as a location in the midst of the Great Green, which means the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, as it was known to the Egyptians. And now we have the locations as well, so we have confirmation that Keftiu was in fact Crete. And now we're slowly moving to the Egyptian depictions of the Cretans. And this is very interesting because not only we have confirmation when it comes to the written records, we also have visual confirmation of how the Cretans looked in the eyes of the Egyptians. And that's very similar to how they looked on their own frescoes, except that the Egyptian frescoes were less stylish, that's for sure. So here we have the Egyptian depictions, and I have listed 4 of them here. We have tomb of Senenmut, dated to about 1470, and this is the reign of Hatshepsut, Tutmosis' mother. And this is the earliest depiction of the Keftiu that we know of. So I will show that on the screen for you. This is the depiction that we're talking about. Tomb of Senenmut. Senenmut, I believe, was a high priest during the reign of Hatshepsut. And as you can see here, these are the Minoans. You can recognize them by these uh, nice clothes that they have. You see, highly decorated, similar to what we know from the Minoan frescoes. You can see the person in the middle holding a big vessel, and bull heads, 2 bull heads are depicted on it. So there's no mistake here. This is how the Minoans are represented on the Egyptian frescoes. And this is the earliest of them. Tomb of Senenmut. Just for reference, it's TT71. If you want to look it up yourself, you can. Carl says, "Oh, cool, that's the one I mentioned in the last video." Yes, so this is the fresco that we're talking about, the earliest depiction of the Minoans in the Egyptian sources. the earliest visual depiction. Well, there can't be a textual depiction, I guess. So just the earliest depiction. Also, the bull iconography on the vessels. That's correct. That's correct. Lena Benetti says Minoans have a thing with bulls. Well, that's well documented. Carl says it's funny I found out about that one because I was reading a manga about Hatshepsut. I didn't even know that they produced that for Hatshepsut and the ancient Egyptian rulers. News Drifter says a question. Is there any good data on the relative population sizes of Egypt and Crete in the Middle Bronze Age? Actually, I believe that there are estimates for Crete. I am sure there are estimates for the ancient Egyptians also, but I am not an expert on ancient Egypt. So this this episode is more related to the ancient Minoans because that's kind of my field, Minoans and Mycenaeans and ancient Greece overall, not uh, Egypt, but it is believed that we do have some information. I would have to go through the data and check the time periods for each individual city, but Knossos obviously was the biggest Minoan city by far. And as Zadeo says in the comments, Knossos had somewhere to 100,000 in 1500 BC. I believe the I believe the estimate is between 35,000 to 100,000 inhabitants. So it is as much as 100, but and he says in 1420 it was somewhere about 50,000 inhabitants. That's huge. But yes, I believe Knossos was a large center for sure, and I do not recall population for Phaistos, which was also in the tens of thousands, perhaps 15 to 20,000 at some point. So I would have to go back and take a look at that because obviously population sizes changed over time when it came to each individual Minoan city. Carl says, I know the Minoans had really rare saffron plants. So yes, saffron was a big thing for export for the Minoans. It's a very expensive spice, and even today saffron is not cheap. But back in those times, they were the earliest known manufacturers and exporters of saffron, and I believe saffron is even depicted on some of the Minoan frescoes. I believe there is a fresco of a Minoan woman collecting saffron. So back to the depictions, this is the earliest depiction. So as you can see, tomb of Senenmun, dated to about 1470 BC, the reign of Hatshepsut, Tutmosis III's mother. Then we have the second one, and the big challenge right here is to correctly pronounce the name of this important individual from Egypt. So it's a tomb of Menkaperennesseb, if I pronounce this correctly, Menkaperennesseb, and it's dated to the similar time period, the reign of Hatshepsut, and it depicts Keftiu or Minoan envoys presenting jewelry. And let me display that on the screen because I have collected all four of these exhibits. As you can see right here, a gentleman to the right, or possibly both of them, but definitely gentleman on the right hand side. As you can see, he's also holding a bull's head item, and that is another depiction of a Minoan envoy. I believe both of these are possibly Minoans. So this is the reign of, well, either Hatshepsut or Tutmosis III, because during this early to mid 15th century BC, we are not sure if Hatshepsut was still a ruler, or or Tutmosis was already ruling jointly with her at this time, or it's not as easy to precisely date this to a year, but we can date it pretty accurately a couple of decades more, one way or the other. The Rhiton or Riton, yes, Zadeo, that was the word I was looking for when it comes to that bull's head. Yeah, the Riton. And yes, Jason as well. Thank you very much. That's the word I was looking for. What did I say? A bull's head item. Yeah, I could not. I was thinking about it for 20 seconds and I couldn't remember, and I just went with item. So thank you for that. So this is a depiction of the Minoans from Meccan Perenneseb, and this is a high religious official from the time of Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III. And moving on, we are going to the tomb of Rechmire in the later part of the 15th century, and this depiction shows Aegean island chiefs carrying gifts for the pharaoh. So right here, I believe we have a quote as well. So let me just shut the segment down for a second. We also have a quote underneath the fresco. As you can see, another religious official from Egypt, later part of the 15th century BC, and the depiction underneath this says, "The chiefs of the islands in the midst of the great green come bearing their gifts, bowing down to beg breath for their nostrils from the majesty of His Majesty." So here he clearly says the chiefs. The chiefs meaning there's multiple chieftains on the island right now. So this is already a period of Minoan decline and the Mycenaean takeover of the island. So strangely, we still have chieftains of the Minoans, or perhaps Minoans plus other palatial. It says islands, so that's a plural. So perhaps Minoan civilization was already highly fragmented by this point, and perhaps perhaps leaders or representatives from multiple palatial centers, perhaps not only from Crete itself, maybe from one of the Cycladic islands, maybe maybe another smaller center that was still within the control or within the influence of the Minoans. This is interesting quote, that's for sure. Zadeo says it was written on her Armand stela. Stela. Well, yes, thank you for that. It might be a Minoan Mycenaean intermarriage. Possibly. I mean, we do know that in the mid 15th century BC, the linear A script goes out of use. By the later part of the century, linear A is out of use and it is replaced by the linear B. And this is the later part of the century. So by this time, linear A is, well, perhaps it was still in use, but we just didn't find, we have not managed to find it to unearth it archaeologically, so that's always a possibility, but it was on decline for sure. The linear A was. So this tells us that Minoans still had their own palatial centers, still had their own representatives. Possibly this was during the Mycenaean takeover, so Mycenaeans had not conquered Crete completely, because we do know that they did destroy many of the palatial centers. They did destroy the parts of Knossos, but they quickly rebuilt it and kept Knossos as their own capital on the island, which then became the Mycenaean period on Crete. So this depiction is very interesting, and the quote that is located on it. Lina Benanti says, Tutmosis III, Julius Caesar of Egypt. Luis Aldames has arrived. He says, Sup all, Wanax, you spoil us with so many live streams. Well, thank you. I'm glad that there's such positive reception for the live streams, because everybody already knows by now that we have not done a regular video in quite some time, close to 2 months, I believe, because we are intensely working on the Etruscan civilization documentary, and that takes time. So in the meantime, usually it takes me a week to produce, or maybe even more than a week to produce a 10 or 15-minute video, and it takes me just a few hours to prepare myself for a topic that I already know about, such as this one, such as the Mycenaean Egyptian relations, such as Mycenaean Hittite conflicts. Those topics do not take me much to prepare for, and I also need minimum preparation when it comes to these animations and exhibits that I displayed on the screen. So it's easy for me to produce live streams while I work on the Etruscan documentary. When the documentary is released, then I will go back to producing perhaps 3 normal videos per month, and I could continue with live streams every week. We could do 2 to 3 live streams every week easily, especially in winter time. So there's going to be a lot of content. So Deo says, there were also different linear A tablets in Knossos, but they're too broken to be able to read them. And we have on bed says this could definitely be related to the Thera eruption given the context. Could be. So when we're talking about definitely yes. So when we're talking about the Mycenaean takeover and this time period in general, it is related to the Thera eruption, because Thera eruption happened recently compared to this period. If we're going by the 1600 BC date or later, then the eruption would have had great impact on the Minoan decline, and that's what allowed the Mycenaeans to initiate their own takeover of the Aegean, because before that, we do remember the presumed earthquake or natural catastrophe that ended the old period and started the new palace period in Crete. It did not cause any Mycenaean takeover, any other takeover of Crete. They bounced back immediately and continued business as usual to even at even greater levels. But here there was they they bounced back in a sense that they still existed. They tried, but their dominance was highly contested now by the Mycenaeans, and eventually they would fall to the Mycenaeans. But moving on, so this is tomb number 3, and this is tomb of Rekhmiri, later part of the 15th century BC. We have several chieftains of the islands of the midst of the Great Green. So the fact that he says islands indicates that there could possibly be somebody else other than Crete being represented on these frescoes. Could be somebody from Cyclades, could be a Mycenaean chieftain, who knows? And now we have the fourth depiction that I put here, Tomb of Usaramen, and this is dated to the reign of Amenhotep II. We have Keftiu. I wrote Meftiu, I misspelled this. So it's Keftiu envoys bringing metal ingots and pottery. And unfortunately, I was not able to find this depiction in color, so this is in black and white. Please forgive me for that. I only had 3-4 hours to prepare all of this. So I tried to work as fast as possible. And this is the tomb in question. Unfortunately, black and white color, but you can clearly see the Minoan representatives here bringing some pottery, bringing some ingots to the Egyptians. Zadeo says the tablets are post 1450, the presumed date when it was believed the linear A stopped being used. So it might have been used, but Greek became the language of the trade. Definitely, this is possible. Yes, Luis Aldames says, "I'm not worried about more or less content. I have you in the bell notification icon, so I should get a message each time you publish, whenever it is." Thank you very much. My plan is to have more content because I need to somehow level up compared to the last year and the year before and the year before, obviously. So my biggest challenge for this year was the Etruscan civilization documentary. That's coming out relatively soon. I believe that I still have about maybe a little bit less than a month till I can release it. I'm still working on the animations and I still need to finish the music, the background music for the video. And in the meantime, we will try to do live stream episodes as often as we can. You can definitely count on Sundays being a good time for me to go live, possibly Saturdays as well, and possibly another day throughout the week, one of the regular work days. We'll try to accommodate that also. And with this, we are finished with the depictions. Obviously, there are more depictions than this. One possible depiction is 4 foreign rulers fresco. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, where one of the 4 individuals is possibly a representative from Keftiu, the other 3 being, I believe, a Libyan, a Nubian, and and the Levantine individual, but that's for the Egyptian depictions of the Cretans. As you can see, they did their part. The Minoans are represented wearing very decorated clothes, a lot of jewelry, very luxuriously clothed, the Minoans, even according to the Egyptians. So they paid their respect. With that being said, we're going to the next segment and the last segment of the episode, which is the fall of the Minoan civilization. And here, as you can see, the fall of the Minoans dated to typically dated to about 1450, but I would say, especially in the context of this episode, more accurately, we could date it to about 1450 to 1400 BC, the time period of of the second part of the 15th century BC, takeover of Crete by the Mycenaean Greeks, the Mycenaeans, who themselves were known as Tanayu to the Egyptians. And this almost certainly happened during the reign of Thutmose III. How do we know that? Not only because he reigned during that time, but we also have very interesting developments. Caftiu delegations during much of his reign. You remember those delegations depicted on the frescoes during Hatshepsut's time, during the duel ruled by Thutmose III and Hatshepsut, and also those inscriptions saying how the rulers of the Caftiu are paying their gifts to the pharaoh, and so on and so on. But during the late part of his campaigns, and now we're talking about the second part of the 15th century BC, I believe 1430s BC is where he had one of his last campaigns in the Levant region, where he defeated the Mitanni garrisons and defeated his adversaries near the city of Kadesh. Did not take the city of Kadesh itself, but he managed to score a victory there before setting up some of his own garrisons, possibly, or establishing some of his own vassals in the area and then leaving. And during that time, when he concluded that campaign, he received, as usual, tribute and gifts from the neighboring city states, from the neighboring kingdoms and polities. And once again, he received one delegation from land far away beyond the sea, and that delegation this time was not the Keftiu, it was the Tanayu. The delegation coming from the king of the Tanayu, they met Tutmosis III and they gifted the pharaoh, I believe, Minoan style pottery with cups. Yes, so that's what we talked about in the last episode, and I will find that this time. Actually, I might not be able to find it. That's going to be very challenging, but we have a description of it. We do have a description of it. I believe it was a Minoan style bowl or jar with with several cups, I believe 3 cups with iron handles. And the fact that these were Minoan-styled pottery gifted to the pharaoh not by the Keftiu, by the Minoans, but by the Tanayu, shows that by this time there has been a political change on the island of Crete. So we can see that in contemporary time here as it relates to Thutmose III. In the earlier part of his reign, he's having campaigns in the Levant and he's receiving gifts, and then he receives gifts from Crete, from the land of Keftiu, and they gift him some metals, some iron, and so on, and jewelry, of course. But this time, during the later part of his reign, when we do know that the Mycenaean Greek civilization was taking over the Minoan Crete, we do not have Keftiu anymore. Now the Tanayu, which are also located, as we have discussed in the previous episode, also located by the Egyptians as a land beyond the land of the Keftiu. So they, in those descriptions, we have land of the Keftiu, and beyond that, in the same direction, which is to the north of Egypt, beyond the sea, we have Tanayu. And some of the locations mentioned by the Egyptians within the land of the Tanayu are Mycenae, Nauplia, Kythera, Messenia, and Thebes. So once again, we have toponyms, geographical confirmation that Tanayu is indeed Greece, mainland Greece, and we do know that the mainland Greeks had conquered Crete by the later part of Thutmosis' reign, which is the later part of the 15th century BC. And what was the outcome of that? What happened subsequently? Mycenaeans rose to become the hegemons of the Aegean Sea. As we already know, they spread into Asia Minor as well, where they had a foothold in the city of Miletus, their chief stronghold in the area, and then they had their own power struggles and conflicts with the Hittites, which we already talked about. When it comes to the Minoans, they continued to live on Crete. And we do have, first in the Odyssey, we have a record of the Eteocretans as one of the autochthonous inhabitants of the island. And we have Eteocretans still inhabiting Crete in the archaic, classical, and even Hellenistic times. As far as Egypt goes, Egypt continued as a great power throughout the late Bronze Age. Jason says, how did they arrive to the word Tanayu? I can't recall a similar Greek toponym or ethnonym right now. Danaans would be the ethnonym. Danaans from Homer's Iliad. And Tanayu is just how we transliterate it. It's not how the Egyptians pronounced it, because it could have been anything between Tanayu, Danayu, or Danea. Could be any word, any pronunciation between those. And Danayu or Danea, because the and the are there's no clear distinction, so we do not know if it was the or the when it comes to Tanayu. So it could have been Danayu, could have been Danaya, and could have been Danea, which is basically the land of the Danaans. Danayoi, as Zadeo says, Danaoi, Danaans, yeah. Yes, so T and D, there's no clear distinction between them in the transliteration. I believe we say Tanayu because that's a scholarly consensus, because we have to mark that symbol somehow. So we use T, but we do know that it's either T or D. It's T or D. Same as linear B, where we have L and R. There's no clear distinction. For example, Lavagetas, second person in charge below Wanax in the society, is written as Ravaketa in linear B, according to the modern scholarly transliteration consensus, but it could have been Lavageta, not Ravaketa. It was likely Lavageta. Same as I believe in Latin, in the early stages of Latin, they did not have distinction between G and C when it comes to the alphabet, if I'm correct. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the same thing. That's why Tanayu was likely Danaya or Danayu. But let's not forget there are no vowels, so there's only Tny or Dny, which would be Danayu, Danaya, Danea, could be any of those. We just don't know the sound. Yes, yes, that's correct. Luis Aldames, I vote for Greece to change their name back to Danea. Well, they invented classical democracy, so perhaps they could democratically vote on that. Let's see what happens. The LR is probably a remnant of Minoan phonology, probably, but there is a RA2, a different R series, which mine is stood as R, but they could have used R as a vowel, too, which the Greeks did not. It may have been differentiated, but just as Latin Gaius or Caius, not enough until the letter G was invented. That's precisely what I'm saying. So in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, same as the linear B, for some of the words, they use one symbol for what could be two different phonetic two different sounds. So L and R in Greece, I believe in linear B, there's I believe a couple more. Let me L R for sure, and G and K also. So let's not forget G and K in linear B also did not have any distinction. So when they say Ravaketa, that is certainly Lavageta. So it's not R, it's L for Lavagetas, and it's not K, it's G, Lavagetas. It's not Ravaketas, it's Lavagetas. Jason says, yes, the Libyans, Libu, are RBW in, in Egyptians. Yes, yes. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. We just call it Greece because our teachers are lazy. That's funny. It comes from Rome, obviously, and likely from Magna Graecia. All right, so this pretty much concludes the episode. As we can see, we have gone through the whole history of the of the Minoan Egyptian trade and diplomacy from the Egyptian point of view, not from the Minoan point of view. Unfortunately, we cannot go and do anything from the Minoan point of view because we do not have written records. We do have them, but we do not understand them. We do not know what the Minoan hieroglyphs say. We do not know what the linear A tablets say. We do know some individual symbols, I believe, as for total, as a total amount of something, and some individual words perhaps, but we do not know the language itself. We do not know, we can't read a linear A tablet. We don't know what it says. Zadeo says it's not Hellenic Republic, it's Helleniki Demokratia, if I say that correctly. Yes, yes, that's how it's called by the Greeks in the Greek constitution. I believe that's how it's written. Basically, Hellenic democracy, if you want to be super precise. But I think that the official English language translation is indeed the Hellenic Republic. Egyptians had similar TD sounding. Yeah. Jim says, have you heard of the Dvorak horde culture called the Yorton? I have not. To be honest, I should check to see what it is. If we ever decipher, Santiago says, if we ever decipher linear A, we will only know how much olive oil the Egyptians bought from the Minoans. Well, that's not far away from the truth because what do we know from the linear B? Exactly how much olive oil and and armor and stuff were produced and distributed by the palatial centers. Not much besides the administrative records. We have a lot of names and a lot of locations where somebody came from, so that's helpful. And we have some minor contacts of the contemporary events, such as people in Pylos rushing to gather a coastal defense because they're being imminently attacked from the sea. Jason says in administrative linear A tablets, total is Q raw and deficit is probably key raw. You see that raw could be law also because R and L are not distinguishable in the written symbols. So it's hard to say, but Zadeo says it's also a deformed form of kura or kuratu, which means power or authority. Oh, you might be right, Jason, actually. The O series is probably not pronounced the same between linear A and linear B. It's usually only word endings. That could be right. It's I'm not a linguist, so forgive me if I make any mistakes when it comes to any of the ancient scripts, which includes but are not limited to linear A, linear B, even Greek alphabet, and not to mention the Egyptian hieroglyphs and everything else. So, all right. So right now we are 1 hour and over 40 minutes in. Pretty impressive. I think pretty soon it's gonna be time for us to conclude the episode. Lino Benetti says Pallas Gala instead of Greece. Oh, a name for Greece. The best country name would have been Pallas Gala instead of Greece. Okay. Luis Aldamis, I suspect that linear B's P symbol is linear A's B. I'm not sure. To be honest, I I would have to check for any of those symbols to see what they represent, even according to the modern convention. So in linear B, not to mention linear A, I have no idea. Jim says, isn't linear A Minoan while linear B is Greek? That would mean linear A could be sounded out and read, just not understood. Uh, yes, you're right. There's only a minor question of whether or not it could be sounded out and read because some of the symbols were perhaps adjusted by the Mycenaeans, possibly to accommodate their own phonetics of their language. So that could be a factor that makes it a little more difficult rather to just sound out and read Minoan but just not understand it. So that there's that small factor, but for the most part, I assume that you would be right in theory. Jim says B, P, V, W, and F are all related letters. Yes, well, it would be more helpful if they used all the same symbols, but I think even with the symbols, Mycenaeans added some of the symbols and they removed some of the symbols. So it's getting a very tricky when it comes to that. Luis Aldames is Indo-Europeans love P peace. Most other peoples do not, and that would make Pelasgos originally Belasco, maybe, which is very Vasconic. Well, that's hard to say from my point of view because it's we could sit here and speculate about. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Zadeo says, and found a seal which shows a soldier, and on the back writes Eketa in linear B, but on the front is Kappa in linear A. Any ideas? Zadeo, could you send me that seal? You have my email, I think, and if you could send me that seal so I can take a look, that's very interesting now that you mentioned that. Do you know if is it a seal with Minoan inscription on one side and Mycenaean on the other? If you could send me that I mean, I would assume that it means the same thing. But do you know if are both sides of the seal the same? Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, send it to me. Send it to me. Yeah, thank you. All right, so we will conclude this episode shortly. It's been a great weekend. We did Mycenaean Egyptian relations and we did Minoan Egyptian relations. And before we go, do you have any suggestions or ideas for the future episodes? I suppose the next episode, the next live stream, we should do within the next 3 days, I guess, 3 or 4 days. So if you have any ideas, if you want to put something forward for us to vote, you're welcome to. In the meantime, I will check if Zadeo emailed me about this seal. This is very interesting. And also, guys, when it comes to the Egyptian content in general, we we did have 2 episodes concerning the Egyptians. But when it comes to the Egyptians in general, I would suggest you to check out History with Sai and his series on ancient Egypt. He does a dynasty by dynasty series starting from dynasty 0, as you can see on the screen, and going all the way. I think right now he's around number 30. So he has one separate video for each and every dynasty that ruled ancient Egypt. And he's a great friend of the channel. And probably most of the subscribers of WanaxTV have come from History with Sai. So it's only right that you, if you are very interested in Egypt, feel free to check out his series if you have not checked that already. Zadeo says it only shows the front. The back doesn't show. I mean, on the pictures, they've deleted that. If you can if you can give me the source, if you can send me the seal and tell me where the seal comes from, which museum, I guess. I suppose they have it in a museum or some other identification of the seal. I might be able to find it. So Hackathon Jason gives us a super chat. Thank you very much for that. So I'll make sure you have another shout out at during the next episode as well, during at the beginning of the next episode. And we have a few suggestions by Jason, and he says number one, Libya and the Libu, and later Kyrene or Cyrenaica or Cyrene, however you want to pronounce that. The Venemon story, okay, that's interesting. That's Egyptians and the Teaker and the city of Dor. The tale of Sinuhe, I would have to research that, not very familiar. For the Amanra letters, and five, the Cycladic or Cycladic civilization. Well, immediately I would say that for me personally, the Cyclades would be the easiest because that's kind of my field. So perhaps we do that in the next episode. If we do Libya and the Libu immediately, I mean, we can do it down the line, but if we do it immediately right now after 2 Egyptian episodes, then I feel like we're kind of stuck to that region a little too much. So what do you think, Jason? What do you think about the Cycladic civilization? Tell me, is it a good topic for the next episode, or for us to do it this week? Maybe not next episode on Wednesday, but maybe yes. But certainly this week, maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday, maybe Saturday or Sunday. Because on next Saturday or Sunday, we should definitely have at least one, if not two episodes. Zadeo says, I will send you the front. Yes, that sounds good. Thank you. Jason said, no needs for further shout outs. I will try to make donations private. Thank you. And we have Pelasgian Skeleton in the chat. And he has arrived at the time when we're about to pretty much end this stream. But welcome to Pelasgian Skeleton. I haven't seen you in the last episode about the Mycenaeans. I haven't seen Pelasgian Skeleton live. So welcome back. I guess since we are at 1 hour and 52 minutes, we should close the 2 hour mark and then just call it a day and end the stream. So I guess we'll be here for another 10 minutes. Jason says whatever people want. Well, we can let's put it on the vote. Let's put Cyclades on the vote. Lena Benetti says no $sign button. I presume you mean for super chat or so. Jim says Amazons would be a good topic to cover. Rodrigo, thanks. Very interesting stream. Okay, so Zadeo has sent me the picture. Let's see, where is it? Well, Zadeo, for some reason I can't see it on my email. Did you send me on the email at WanaxTV email? Perhaps it doesn't load immediately. Lino Benetti sends us a gift of one membership, and we have Nicolaus who has received a gift membership from Lino Benetti. Thank you very much, Lino, and I guess both you and Jason, um, we're going to mention that in the next episode. It's nice to have a little tradition where whoever does something live, we still mention him in the next episode. I think that's nice. So, Nicolaus, welcome to the community. Jason says maybe Cycladic frying pan iconography. Well, maybe. Well, we'll definitely mention that, but whether. Okay, so now we have Zadeo also with a super chat. So thank you very much, Zadeo. And now we have, well, thank you guys. I did not foresee these many super chats happening. So I appreciate it. Jim says Deucalion's flood might be interesting. Mark Papa says I enjoyed walk like a Minoan. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, big thanks to Zadeo, big thanks to Lino Benetti, big thanks to Jason. And also, when I think about it, as we grow as a channel, as a community, I imagine at some point we're going to have more viewers, more people in the chat and everything. So if anybody would like to be a moderator in the chat, let me know and I can make you a moderator. I don't think that you're gonna have much work to do because we have a nice cultured chat. We don't have any. I haven't encountered any like spams or some comments that should be censored or anything like that. I never moderated the chat in any of the episodes, so that's pretty impressive. Zadeo says it's not much, but hopefully the channel will grow. Well, thank you very much, Zadeo. I think the best gift that you can give us is that you are here whenever you can on a live stream. So, because it's very interesting, we do have some of the standard people that are always here, and we have Jason Luis Aldames is always here. Interdictor is always here. I see him every stream. I see Lino Benetti. I see Nicolaus. And I mean, I don't want to not mention everybody because I should be mentioning about 25 people right now. So whoever is online right now, I see them here frequently. I see Jim Ewing frequently. I see, let's see, Pelasgian Skeleton. Obviously, he's been on multiple times. Santiago's been here multiple times. Who else from the people who are online currently? Oh yes, we have says on bed. I want to get this person's name correctly so I can give him a proper shout out when he's here because that's only fair.
On bed etiquette.
Okay, on bed Aldecott, close enough, close enough. On bed Aldecott, shout out to you. I see you uh, almost every episode as well. So Luis Aldame says, also, sometimes I do sleep, believe it or not, almost 2 a.m. here. Well, I should not keep you guys on for too long. I think we had a great episode. Tell me if you like this one better or the Mycenaean Egyptian episode. I think this one, I liked this one a little bit more. I don't know why, but both episodes have been very interesting. Obviously, the Sea Peoples also. So perhaps we could do the Cyclades in the next episode, or the Cyclades. In if we go closer to the original Greek pronunciation, we say Cyclades, and more anglicized would be Cyclades. Nicolaus says both. Okay, then we'll use the terms interchangeably. No problem. All right, so both were very good. Thank you, Jason. Puzalam says, worry not. If I'm here, I wasn't really going to sleep. Okay, fair enough. Zadeo, Mystery Sparks Pleasure. All right, well, guys, thank you very much for being here. I highly appreciate it. This is not often I can do these consecutive episodes, one each day. On weekend, I might be able to pull it off, especially since I should be doing it every Sunday, and if I can add Saturday to it, that's great. So, thank you very much. We'll see you again in a few days. We might do the Cyclades, aka the Cyclades, next. Stay tuned and have a nice evening. Have a good night. Take care.